As you know, today is the 77th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bombings, and we commemorate the victims, and we pledge to do everything that we can to win a world free from nuclear weapons, free of war. And this is something that is very near to me. I grew up, in fact, in the peace movement. My father was an anti-war activist who was fired from a teaching job in the 60s for wearing a peace button. He was a survivor of the Holocaust, the only surviving child after the war, 5 survivors in total. So the intergenerational effects of war, intergenerational effects on me meant that I grew up void of family from my father's side. So this is very deep for me. And I just want to say, for everybody here who is commemorating the loss of loved ones or the impact on your families, that I do stand in solidarity for you, with you. We need a world of peace. And as I said, I'm very proud to represent this riding, another reason being because we also are riding with the tradition of peace, going all the way back to J.S. Wordsworth. And so I'm very proud to carry on his tradition, to be vocal about my positions on peace, even at times where I've faced some backlash. And part of my job is pushing the government. I'm happy to say that our party has signed on to the treaty for the prohibition for nuclear weapons. We need to go further, but I'm glad that we're taking that position, particularly around the prohibition on nuclear weapons. But as Canada, we should be playing a leading role when it comes to the global disarmament, but that is not happening with this government or other governments. We've been absent, and I would come publicly out to state that I do not support an increase in military spending. I'm going to be in trouble, just kidding. But worse than that, we voted against a resolution in the House of Commons to start on a treaty at the UN General Assembly in 2016 and boycotted the negotiations that began in 2017 as a government. And we must not do that, particularly where we find ourselves right now with wars that are growing, Ukraine, Palestine, around the world. This impacts families, this impacts children, and they deserve a place of peace where they can live freely who they are, free of violence, to live their life. And I think it's shameful that almost 14,000 nuclear weapons in the world are an existential threat to all life on Earth in real time. They must be disarmed, and we must stop the cycle that keeps these nuclear weapons being produced and maintained. And I would go further to say Canada needs to stop selling arms to places like Saudi Arabia. So I want to let you that I know that I am, along with my colleagues, will keep pushing the federal government to show, in this area particular, real leadership and support for nuclear disarmament. So I'm asking you, write your MP, except for me. I'm just kidding. You can write me. I like letters. And ask them to raise their voice in calling on Canada to sign the treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. I know our foreign affairs critic, Heather McPherson, has been very clear on the NDP position on this. Every email, and this is the truth, every email you send, every phone call you make, and every letter that you send, especially if it comes in droves, makes a difference, forces elected officials to pay attention, and we need that to happen because it's 2022 And now is the time, particularly not just with the impacts of war, but also what we're faced with, which is a climate emergency. We need a nuclear weapons-free world, and it's time to ban the bomb. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Junko, Leah, and everyone for being here. We're here once again to remember and to honor all those who lost their lives at Hiroshima and Nagasaki 77 years ago, and to listen to the voices of those who survived and who have rebuilt their cities and communities in dedication to these memories, and beyond that, to inspire and lead a global movement for nuclear disarmament and peace. Today's a sad day, but it is also one in which we can mark 77 years of success in preventing this from happening to anyone, anywhere again for such a long time. It is the gift of a global movement of extraordinary breadth and depth that has been created by the people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, just when we need it. Today, the mayor of Hiroshima gently evoked the timely power of nonviolence across borders with his reference to Tolstoy's words of peace and caring for each other, that we need no much to move forward. And Antonio Guterres, also speaking in Hiroshima, underlined how much we need to remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki in our present time of heightened danger. Their underlying widening fractures between the major nuclear powers in different corners of the world, a weakening of the international guardrails for conflict reduction and peace, danger in multiple places in Ukraine, in Iran and throughout the Middle East and Palestine, nuclear-powered submarines promised for the South Pacific, North Korea, and the US-Taiwan-China triangle. And at the same time, there are terrible limits to the treaty frameworks that provide for some control over the numbers of strategic nuclear weapons held by the US and Russia. Those are the main instruments that we have for trying to reduce nuclear war. Reducing strategic nuclear warheads to 1,500 by the end of the current treaty doesn't actually give us any noticeable degree of peace. Instead, all the major nuclear powers are modernizing their arsenals, creating tactical weapons, tactical nuclear weapons that they think are ones that are small enough to be used without ending the world. Some of those are larger than the ones used in Hiroshima. So what we have is a system where we don't have a framework that is capable of managing the increasing dangers that are posed by the nuclearization of conflict in the world. But I don't want to talk so much about that. What I do want to talk about is what the global nuclear disarmament movement has been doing for the past decade, and more about what it can do and is doing now. And also to talk about what we're doing here. And there are a number of things that we can do here. All of us are doing something by coming and joining in making Lanterns for Peace tonight. And I'm much reminded tonight of last year's festival and the celebration of the breakthrough accomplishment of the River East Collegiate student leaders in moving Winnipeg cities to endorse the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was only the 10th city in Canada to do so, and more have since followed. And this is part of a large movement of citizens in cities around the world to work for peace when sometimes other political leaders are not. And that is, I'm so delighted to have Leah here. She's sort of this is another breakthrough that we can celebrate tonight. So what we have is a great deal of work in which structures such as the Mayors for Peace, under the leadership of the Mayor of Hiroshima, has been moving this thing forward at the local level. Winnipeg has been a member of that since 2003. And one of the things that particularly encourages me tonight is, again, Leah Gazan's presence here, because it's very important to have parliamentarians step forward to endorse the Treaty for the Prevention of Nuclear War and for peace and a reduction or end to military spending in general. So one of the ways in which all of us can be effective in working for disarmament is through being a part of this global change that is presently underway. And its most decisive and durable form available to us to work for right now is through the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And it is to that end that people are mobilizing now in the support of work that is going on at the conference on the Non-Proliferation Treaty that is being held in New York right now. It's running from October 1st to 26th. Now, the Non-Proliferation Treaty is a much more limited vehicle, but it is something that we want to look at because it provides an avenue through which community, NGO, peace groups come together with states and get a chance to talk from those diverse points of view, and perhaps we can create more influence for the actual prohibition of nuclear weapons. I was very glad to see what Leah said about the support that is now appearing in Ottawa for all of this. One of the problems that we have here is that the Treaty for the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons is not currently being supported by Canada. It is the ultimate step that we want to take in terms of dealing with nuclear weapons, to get rid of them entirely. And that may seem like a large thing to accomplish, but if we put that in perspective, we can see that if we look back to World War I, people were devastated by the appearance of chemical weapons that killed hundreds of thousands of people in terrible ways. And it led to a movement that has successfully, almost completely eliminated the existence of chemical weapons. And we can think about the more recent success with landmines, and that has had an important Canadian contribution. What we can see now is that the work for the elimination of nuclear weapons builds on all of this experience that has been going on for decades. It has at this point been ratified by 66 nations, with more in progress. It was adopted in July 2017, came into force when it had 50 ratifications in January 2021. But the states that have ratified the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons are all states that don't have any nuclear weapons. So the next step is to get Canada to move forward and to start softening the resistance of NATO and other US allies to participate in joining this movement for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. In June of this year, there was the first meeting of the states parties of the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. 4 NATO countries attended as observers. This broke the unified resistance of NATO to any participation. Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Norway attended as observers. Canada was lobbied to attend but did not. There's another meeting of the members of the state parties to the TPNW coming up this fall. Let's get Canada to that one. This is something we could work for, and we could send letters, as Leah suggests, to try to get our politicians to work on this. What's going on right now in New York is an important meeting about the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It came into effect around about in 1970 in response to the danger posed by the United States and the then Soviet Union, which were the major nuclear powers, and to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons to other countries and to begin to work towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. It's part of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Its Article 6 is that the states that are a party to it will work to bring an end to nuclear weapons. It is widely observed that the nuclear powers, most of which have joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty, are doing no such work. So they're in violation of their treaty obligations here. So some of the effort here at what is a deferred celebration of the 50 years of this treaty that couldn't be held in 2020 due to the pandemic, and is being held now, is to try to exert pressure towards moving towards the final prohibition. I would have to say that there's a fair bit of concern about this particular conference, that it is one that is so strongly dominated by the existing nuclear powers. It is seen more as a place in which we're going to try to build guardrails to prevent anything really terrible from happening until we can make some more substantive progress. But it is something to work for, because it is a place where the countries that wish to abolish and have undertaken to do so through the Treaty for the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons are represented. It's also a place where the nuclear powers are there. 116 countries are going to be represented, and all kinds of other forces, including the people who worked so hard to create the Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, will also be present. On the opening day, there was a young woman speaking from Ukraine, reminding everybody of the enormous danger that we face in Europe. And at the same time, while we look at that, we are observing, if we watch the news, that there are powers that are not forgetting what is going on in Asia and that are working on bringing heightening conflict in the Asia region as well. And we only need to think back to World War II to remember when conflicts in Europe ended up having a devastating toll displaced into Asia. We would not wish that to happen again, and we have to watch the developments by the activities of nuclear powers in Asia very closely, particularly those outside Asia that may feel that this is a safe place in which to act. Watch for the activities of non-governmental organizations during the Non-Proliferation Treaty meetings. Watch what Canada does and doesn't do. We should be asking Canada to do more. It is there. It is there with a sizable delegation, including people who work for peace. We need to push Canada to do more. It has a history of doing so in the past, but it needs to show up at this time. And finally, the note I would like to close on is, although we have to see that we're in dark times, there's somebody who left us with some very appropriate words for these days. Nelson Mandela told us once, "It always seems impossible until it's done."
Thank you, Ellen.
Next, I would like to read the peace declaration by Mayor of Hiroshima, which was presented in Japan on August 6th, which is already tomorrow. I adore my mother. She raised me with such kindness and care. The woman speaking was 16 when she left home, carrying the lunch her mother had lovingly prepared. She never imagined it would be their final parting. Summer 77 years ago. That morning, without warning, the first nuclear weapon was dropped and detonated over humanity. Standing near Hiroshima Station, the girl saw a terrifying flash. Then came a thunderous roar. Striking from behind, the blast blew her through the air and knocked her unconscious. When she came to, she wandered through the smoldering city, searching for her mother. She saw a horrifying number of blackened bodies. Overcharred corpse still stood, clinging to the neck of a cow. Bodies floating in the river drifted up and down with the tide. She still remembers the morning when everyday life vanished violently into scenes from hell. In invading Ukraine, the Russian leader, elected to protect the lives and property of his people, is using them as instruments of war, stealing the lives and livelihoods of innocent civilians in another country. Around the world, the notion that peace depends on nuclear deterrence gains momentum. These errors betray humanity's determination, born of our experiences of war, to achieve a peaceful world free from nuclear weapons. To accept the status quo and abandon the ideal peace maintained without military force is to threaten the very survival of the human race. We must stop repeating these mistakes. Above all, and thrusting a nuclear button to any world leader is a sanctioned continued nuclear threat to humanity and potential recreation of the hellscape of August 6, 1945. We must immediately render all nuclear buttons meaningless. Must we keep tolerating self-centeredness that threatens others, even to the point of denying their existence? We should take to heart the word of Leo Tolstoy, the renowned Russian author of War and Peace, who advised, "Never build your happiness on the misfortune of others, for only in their happiness can you find your own." Earlier this year, the 5 nuclear weapon states issued a joint statement. Nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. They further declared their intent to remain committed to our Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT) obligations. Having issued such a statement, why do they not attempt to fulfill their promises? Why do some even hint at using nuclear weapons? The nuclear powers must act now to build bridges of trust among nations. Rather than treating a world without nuclear weapons like a distant dream, they should be taking concrete steps towards its realization. I call on the leaders of the nuclear weapon states to visit the atomic bomb cities where they can personally encounter the consequences of using nuclear weapons and strengthen their will to take these steps. I want them to understand that the only sure way to protect their lives and property of their people is to eliminate nuclear weapons. I fervently hope that leaders who attend the G7 summit in Hiroshima next year will reach this conclusion. With the Hibakusha's will to peace at our core and inheriting the never give up spirit of Hibakusha leader Tsuboi Sunao, who dedicated his life to the cause, Hiroshima will continue striding towards nuclear weapons abolition, however arduous the path. Mayor for Peace, now a network of 8,200 peace cities around the world, will hold its 10th General Conference in Hiroshima this year. The conference will work towards a civil society in which each and every citizen shares the conviction that happy lives require an end to war, an end to armed.
Sorry. That's okay now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Well done, Glenn.
An end to armed conflict and an end to life-threatening social discrimination. In that pursuit, we will intensify cooperation among our peace-minded member cities to promote a culture of peace that rejects all forms of violence. Mayors for Peace encourages policymakers to pursue foreign policies through dialogue without relying on nuclear deterrence. This past June, the first meeting of states parties to the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, TPNW, adopted a declaration that, against the backdrop of the Russian invasion, categorically reject the threat of nuclear weapons, with nuclear weapon-dependent states participating as observers. The meeting specifically stressed that TPNW contributes to and complements the NPT. Therefore, I demand first that Japanese government serve as mediator at the NPT review conference. Then, Japan must participate in the next meeting of state parties to the TPNW, promptly become a state party itself, and wholeheartedly support the movement towards nuclear weapon abolition. The average age of the Hibakusha now exceeds 84. and their lives and still impaired by radiation's adverse effect on their minds and bodies. Thus, I further demand the Japanese government emphasize with their suffering to better offer them enhanced support measures. Today, at this peace memorial ceremony commemorating 77 years since the bombing, we offer heartfelt condolences to the soul of the atomic bomb's victims. Together with Nagasaki and like-minded people around the world, we pledge to do everything in our power to abolish nuclear weapons and light the way towards lasting world peace. August 6, 2022. Kazumi Matsui, Mayor, the City of Hiroshima. And next, we have a reading from the book called Black Rain, and read by Candice Bodnarak.
Thank you, Junko, Ellen, and Leah for being here. And I'll just quickly say a little bit about the book. So this is, Black Rain is based on real-life diaries and interviews with the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It has been called a documentary novel or an I-novel, which is considered to be a chunk of life is presented for our inspection without overt comment or a very obvious plot. So we're basically seeing these characters as the things, of course, are happening to them. And just from the introduction to the book, written by John Bester, the introduction, dealing with the grimmest of subjects, the work is not in the end depressing, for the author is ultimately concerned with life rather than death, and with an overall beauty that transcends ugliness of detail. So I will just read a portion here. Shigeko sat down beside her on a stone by the roadside and attended to her elbow with mentholatum and a triangular bandage. Suddenly it occurred to me that we were directly in front of an entrance that I knew. Just a moment, I said. Surely that stone's one from Mr. Omuro's garden. The Omuros in question were an old family, said to date back to the Edo period, and the present head was engaged in chemical research on spinning thread. He was a man of property, owning mills in 3 different places, as well as dabbling in calligraphy, painting, and art collecting. I had visited the house myself several times during the past year for the benefit of his advice on matters concerning textile products. It had been an imposing mansion with a splendid old-style garden. Now, however, it was completely razed to the ground. Where the main building and clay-walled storehouse had once stood was an arid waste scattered with broken tiles. The stone on which Shigeko and Yasuko were sitting was almost certainly a rock from the garden inside the grounds. Rock though it was, a thin layer had been burned away all over it. That rock's granite, you know, I said. I expect it was covered with moss only this morning. Do you think the whole household was wiped out then? Said Shigeko. I did not reply. It was a scene of cruel desolation. Where the ornamental pond had once been was an uneven stretch of blackish mud, and at the foot of a rounded hillock of earth lay the blackened skeletons of 3 large pine trees. Beside the trunk of the thickest of the 3 stood a narrow, square pillar of stone. Why it alone should have remained standing was a mystery. Mr. Omuro had once told me that an ancestor of his, several generations back, had erected it there. It was somewhat over 10 feet tall, and instead of the usual long inscription, it had the single character "Dream" carved on it about 2.5 feet from the top. Some high-ranking priest was said to have written the original, and the effect was doubtless considered stylish and rather sophisticated in its day, but at present, style and sophistication alike failed utterly. Both Shigeko and Yasuko were deathly pale. My throat was so dry it felt as though it might close up entirely, and a slight tic affected my eye as I walked. We reached the entrance to the west parade ground. The grass on the west side of the embankment had been burned away, leaving the earth smooth and bare. The trees seemed to have been carbonized where they stood and retained their branches, but not a single leaf. The divisional commander's residence, the temporary army hospital, the Gokoko Shrine, and of course the keep of Hiroshima Castle were all gone. My eyes began to hurt, so I massaged them as I walked by, rubbing the eyelids with my fingers. They smarted and at the same time felt as though there was grit in them. Shigeko and Yasuko had cheered up a little, and were talking about the now vanished mushroom cloud. Its size, its shape, its color, and the shape of its stalk and the way it had moved. Concluding that my eyes hurt because I had too much blood in the head, I had Yasuko give me the treatment they used to give children who had nosebleeds. It consisted of no more than pulling out 3 hairs from the back of my head, but it helped the pain a little. The West Parade Ground was an unbroken expanse of sand. It reminded me of a vast desert I had seen in a movie called Morocco. Even in the film, the desert had seemed to exhale a smell of sand, and it had been quite empty, with not a single footprint visible. The sandy waste of the parade ground, however, was rather different. The hot breath it gave off stank of smoke, and there were a number of human trails leading away in the direction of the hills. It must have been raining. The sand was fine enough for the holes of broad beans to be visible all over its surface, and the newspapers scattered here and there were covered with countless bean-sized black spots. The black rain had evidently fallen here. I had realized that the stalk of the mushroom cloud was a shower, but I had not imagined that the drops were as big as this. At the western edge of the ground, we found a number of what looked like round black balls lying in the sand. At first I could not identify them, but as I got closer, I realized they were lumps of what had been tin sheeting. They must have been torn away by the blast and have risen up into the sky, where they had been softened by the intense heat, then kneaded into balls by the wind before falling. To have gone quite round, like dumplings, they must have been sucked up into the heat, into the great whirlwind of flame, and have spun round and round furiously, before finally descending to earth.
Thank you, Candice. And the next, I'd like to introduce you to Kaya Matheson and Luca Kennedy. The ladies gonna read the story of Sadako.
Origami, the art of folding paper to make decorative items, is a common indoor entertainment in Japan, and most people learn how to fold an origami crane in their youth. As the crane is a symbol of long life, strings of 1,000 paper cranes, or senbazuru in Japanese, are often offered as get-well gifts, expressing hope for a person's recovery as a sign of support for natural disaster victims or encouragement for sports teams. These days, paper cranes are starting to become known around the world as tangible form of prayer for peace or a way to show support for people facing difficult challenges.
Sadako was just 2 years old and 2 kilometers away from the atomic bomb when it was dropped on her hometown, Hiroshima, in 1945. Most of Sadako's neighbors died, but Sadako wasn't injured at all, at least not in the way people could see.
Up until the time Sadako was in the 7th grade, 12 years old in 1955, she was a normal, happy girl and a keen runner. However, one day during a school race that she helped her team win, she felt extremely tired and dizzy. This got worse and worse until one day Sadako became so dizzy that she fell down and was unable to get up. Her schoolmates informed the teacher, and Sadako's parents took her to the Red Cross hospital to see what was wrong with her. Sadako found out that she had leukemia. At the time, they called leukemia the A-bomb disease. There was a low survival rate for the A-bomb disease, and Sadako was very scared.
During Sadako's stay in the hospital, her best friend, Chizuko, came to visit her. Chizuko brought some origami folding paper and told Sadako a legend. She explained that the crane, a sacred bird in Japan, lives for 100 years, and if a sick person folds 1,000 paper cranes, then that person would soon get well. After hearing the legend, Sadako decided to fold 1,000 paper cranes and pray that she would get well again.
Sadako kept folding paper cranes even though she was in great pain. Even during these times of great pain, she was known by hospital staff and other patients as a cheerful and helpful, and always asking for help for scraps of paper or material to continue folding cranes. Although Sadako knew she would not survive, she folded from 1,300 to 1,500 cranes and continued to be strong for the sake of her family. In October 1955, after an 8-month battle with the illness, her family standing by her side, she died.
Sadako's classmates had lost many of their friends to the A-bomb disease and were saddened by the loss of Sadako. They decided to form a unity club to honor her and stay in touch after they all left the school. From 3,100 schools and from 9 foreign countries gave money to get a statue built to recognize the many children who lost their lives because of the bomb.
On May 5, 1958, almost 3 years after Sadako had died, enough money was collected to build a monument in her honor. A figure of a girl with arms outstretched holding a golden paper crane is said to be modeled on her. It is known as the Children's Peace Monument and is located in the center of Hiroshima Peace Park, close to the spot where the atomic bomb was dropped. Some 10 million cranes from around the world are offered at the monument each year.
The act of folding a crane started by Sadako and her classmates turned into a national, then an international children's peace movement. Children from all over the world still send folded paper cranes to be placed beneath Sadako's statue. In so doing, they fulfill the wish engraved on the base of the statue.
The wish is, this is our cry, this is our prayer, peace in the world.
Thank you, Kaya and Luta. So we come to the end of the ceremony, and I like to close the ceremony with the quote from a speech from 2018 peace ceremony in Nagasaki made by the mayor of Nagasaki. Let Nagasaki and Hiroshima remind us to put peace first every day, to work on conflict prevention and resolution, reconciliation and dialogue, and to tackle the root of conflict and violence. Peace is not an abstract concept, and it does not come about by chance. Peace is tangible, and it can be built by hard work, solidarity, compassion, and respect. Out of the horror of the atomic bomb, we can reach a deeper understanding of our irreducible bond of responsibility to each other. Let us all commit to making Nagasaki the last place on earth to suffer nuclear devastation. Thank you. ありがとうございます. And now we like to launch the lanterns. He would go to the side of the pond and pick up your lantern.